today's video. I talked to a new guest, Jonny Walker. Jonny is a children's author, mythologist teacher and public speaker. I met Jonny while delivering my TEDx talk last year, as he was also delivering a TEDx talk called Hush Now Adults, the Children Are Talking. We talk about the education sector, what it was like for Jonny growing up, and what more can be done for neurodiverse individuals. Hey guys, and welcome to the last episode of this year's Autism Connections Series 6, and I'm pleased to announce the last guest of this year's series, Jonny Walker. So Jonny, thank you for coming on the Autism Connections, our last guest of the Series 6 today. It's been really nice because I've invited previous guests to come on from other series because we're celebrating 5 years. So you are the only new guest this series, so no pressure. But I start every episode when we have new guests basically saying, what is your connection to autism? And it could be that you don't have any. It could be that you are neurodiverse yourself. It could be that you're in the field of neurodiversity, or it could just be that you're teaching, or any of those things. So, what is your connection to autism?
Sure. So a few different ways, I guess. So I'm a primary school teacher, so been working in East London primary schools for about the last 14 years. So I've taught lots of different students, either students who have a diagnosis of autism at the time, or students who I've taught and who have then gone on to receive a diagnosis of autism. More recently, like since lockdown, I've started teaching online as well. So alongside work in schools, teaching online. Where I've become a mythology educator. And I think that's what's brought me probably into much more contact with a much wider range of students of different ages, many of whom have got, different forms of neurodivergences. So like mythology, I would say, is probably the strongest link. But also, like family and friends. So I've got some adult friends who are, neurodivergent themselves, but also have children, who are autistic. So there's quite a few different little ways.
No, absolutely. And, we obviously met through doing TEDx talks in Walthamstow.
Yeah.
And your speech really blew me away. I mean, everyone's did, but you get a few that you really resonate with. And when you were doing your speech, I couldn't help feel, if I had a teacher like you when I was at school, how better my education would have been, and how better the support I would have had. Um, so it sort of leads me to my question of, what led you to want to go on and do a TEDx talk? Hush now, adults, the children are talking. Um, if no one has seen it, I'm sure there's plenty of people that have seen it. If you haven't seen it, please make sure you check it out. What sort of led you to want to do a TEDx talk, and also what made you want to get into education?
Mm. So I suppose like with the first one, the talk idea, I felt very fortunate that in the last 3 or 4 years, I felt like my teaching had changed quite a lot. And I think because of having had that opportunity to teach online, so I now work for myself as well. So I get to work in a much wider range of schools and in lots of different settings. Um, I think through doing so, it had changed my views on what matters in education. So rather than seeing yourself as an effective teacher because you understand one school's particular way of doing things, I think I'd started to see a broader sense of what works everywhere and what children of all different ages and with all different needs, what benefits all of them. And I think at the heart of it, it was about the interaction that you have. So irrespective of what it is that you're teaching, um, the quality of discussion and the quality of teachers listening seems to be a really huge part of that. And I think in large part, even though in the talk, I was talking mostly about my work face to face in schools. I think a lot of my understanding of different children's needs and how that shapes what you want to do as a teacher probably came from teaching online on this outschool platform, because then, more than I would have ever encountered within one classroom in one school in one area, I had a much wider range of needs, and it shapes how you see things. So I'm very much not positioning myself as an expert on these things. By doing that talk, it's more I've personally felt really invigorated at a time that a lot of teachers feel very demotivated. I don't think I've ever been more interested in the practices of being in the classroom, and I feel like in a small way, I think I'm getting better at it because I'm not focusing on the smaller things that feel like they matter a lot. I feel like there's a kind of undercurrent of connection, I suppose, that sits beneath all of it, and it makes you want to teach. At a time when teaching can be very difficult, it's also much more enjoyable to have those human connections. And education, you asked as well why I got into education. I think I always just I think maybe I'm just completely institutionalized because I've never not been never not been in it. So, I didn't have a gap year or anything. I went straight from school into university, straight into school again, and there I've remained. Um, yeah, I've always found people really interesting. So I studied like social sciences and stuff at university. So like in an academic way as well as in a personal way, I just find it interesting being with people. And I've just enjoyed working with kids, enjoyed being a teacher. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I could sort of relate to that because I've gone from school. I didn't really enjoy Um, so I didn't enjoy. I didn't feel supported is probably the word at primary school. I felt supported from some teachers, but not all. And then when I went to secondary school, none of that was there. Then I went to an SEN school, felt more supported. Went to college, didn't. Went to one business, and I did feel really supported there. Went to other businesses, didn't. And then found myself working back into the school um, sort of sector as well, but working IT. So it's something definitely to be said about familiar surroundings and I don't know, that structure and that routine is
Mm.
can be quite good, even if you're working at a school, even though you probably end up do working ridiculous hours anyway, and still breaking those routines quite a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
I mean, for you growing up, I mean, what was the sort of understanding and awareness for neurodiversity like when you was growing up? Do you feel that's a lot better now, or do you feel it's still not enough? And what was it like for you growing up?
Mm. So when I think about my secondary school, I largely think of bullying. And I think definitely autism was one of the things that people would have been bullied for. I think it was in a context of any form of difference was something that people could be bullied for. And very often the people who had it worst had a combination of many different factors. They might have been the poorest in a school which was already very poor. It was like a working class community where pretty much everybody was struggling financially. But obviously within that, if you have the nicest trainers, but you're also poor, you are contextually like rich within that setting. So it was a school where any form of difference could mark you out and make you vulnerable. And it wasn't just a fear born of nothing. Like it was quite a physically violent place in lots of ways as well. So sadly, when I think about autism in the context of my own schooling, it's in the context of these kids who would have had just an atrocious time just navigating physical risk at the same time as having to navigate the social challenges of being in a huge school and learning and the high stakes of all of that as well. I do feel like I've seen changes in the last 10, 15 years, and I think that's in large part due to different understandings of of neurodiversity itself, but also of difference. And it feels to me as if more people recognize, like their own inner life. Like people are thinking about thinking a lot more. They're thinking about how they interact. And it seems like there's just a general social change, which is now more present in schools. The school that I started teaching in is a huge one. So it's in East London. And I think it had a reputation, like when I joined, it had a reputation as being particularly good for children with autism. So, like within the local area, some schools had that reputation, some schools didn't. And I've seen that school develop its own practices over the last sort of 10, 15 years. So I think there are pockets of really good things that are happening in schools, but also I know that there are huge pockets of ignorance and also funding plays a really big part in it too. So where schools feel as if they don't have the money or they objectively don't, um, they're not necessarily placed to like redirect resources to meet a more diverse range of needs that might present themselves in a classroom too. So I think, yeah, broadly, I think the understanding is better than it was. Still not good and still not like refined enough to catch the intersectional sides of things. I mean, you're very much more the expert on, on all of this, but I certainly have agreed with what I've heard you saying in your own TED talk as well, that, if once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. You can't draw like conclusions and parallels. And I do see that in schools quite a lot, where there's still, if you have an autistic child, this is what you should do, as if there's a kind of one uniform character.
Like a rule for one and a rule for all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still there, but hopefully getting better, I would say.
Yeah, I think the thing that myself combat is I think there's a lot of awareness. And I think the understanding has improved. I think you're right, it still needs to go up a lot because I think there's still a lot of autistic children that get excluded from school. I think it's 50,
Mm.
which is
Mhm.
shocking. But I think a lot of schools also haven't got at times they haven't got the resource and the money by government in order to, as you said, to put those things in. I would say sometimes, reasonable adjustments can be put in that are very not cost effective. So I remember in your TEDx talk, there was a student that would often say something, and you would have to remind them that it was not the necessarily right time to say something, but you actually put in but what I would say is a reasonable adjustment, which actually doesn't cost, in this case, didn't cost any money at all. So if you just remind me of that, because I thought that in your TEDx talk was a brilliant example of how a reasonable adjustment could be put in place that actually doesn't really cost anything.
Yeah, sure. So there was a child in one of my early classes. So it would have been when I was only maybe about 22 or 23 myself as the teacher. And every time I would share anything, like we'd get to the point where we'd have good listening-ish going on in the classroom as a group. Um, but as soon as we'd established quiet so that we could talk, the child would sort of steamroll through and use that as a direct chance to communicate with me, not just about the learning, but about literally everything. So often hip hop, Busta Rhymes, Dr. Dre, like anything the kid was really interested in, he would like fire it across the room in the middle of a maths lesson. And it was that strange little thing. And I think as a teacher, you develop a different kind of understanding as you go through. So at first I would see it as like, right, I've got a behavioral threat here. Like this child thinks they're, better than me or something, you see it as like a personal challenge. Whereas actually, I think, and this is what I was talking about in the talk, stepping back and recognizing that all children have a similar set of kind of needs, a desire to be seen, to feel safe, to feel like somebody. This kid perhaps didn't have that sense of security in the relationship, and maybe it's a pattern that is beyond me. It's just the way that the child engages, with everybody. It's they're not doing it out of nowhere. It comes out of an unmet need. So my modification was that we'd have a special hand signal. So the school rule was that you kind of raise a hand and then all the kids copy. And then that just means we've kind of, without making it a really loud classroom setting, we've just established it's more time to focus on listening. So with this kid, we would do this, and then I'd do like a little finger gesture to him, and he'd do it back if he was absolutely fine. If he didn't do it back, I'd go and like check in with him one to one. So yeah, like relationship building, I think is a really good form of reasonable and often easy adjustment. And actually, for the teacher themselves, more enjoyable. Teaching is a lot harder if you don't invest in the relationships because it all feels completely soulless and pointless. It's just like driving children unwillingly through a broken system so that you can fill a spreadsheet with green cells at some point in the future. If there's no relational side to any of this, and if you're not going to invest in understanding each other, you're taking the whole heart out of the endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want your children to actually enjoy and want to do well and have, again, have that relationship where they can't wait to show the teacher their work or what they've worked on, or have that passion and that enthusiasm. Otherwise you're right. What are we actually doing?
Mm,
As you say, I love the analogy of just, driving children through a broken system just to fill in a spreadsheet. So it's great. I
mm,
love that. For you, I mean, what's the sort of biggest obstacles for you while teaching? Is it the fact money's very tight and you don't get that additional support from government, or is it that understanding and awareness for neurodiverse individuals isn't there, or just generally, what is the biggest barrier for you as a teacher?
mm. So, I'm very keen in my role that I have now. So I've been out of day-to-day classroom teaching since 2019. So now that I do that more specialized role, I am still in the schools, but I'm teaching my own thing in my own way. So I'm aware that I don't want to be seen to speak for teachers. However, if I was to tiptoe into doing so a little bit, what I hear and what I see when I'm in the classrooms is very often so much has been put onto the role of teacher, that you're like the front line of social service at a time when, especially in areas where there's high levels of financial disadvantage as well, kids are coming to school with so many needs before you even get to think about sitting down and learning a curriculum. Um, so, the reason that I mention that is I suppose for the teachers themselves, so much of their time and attention is taken by meeting a huge range of needs before we even look at the learning. And it becomes very hard then to be what all different children are going to need. Um, that's not to say that I don't think a lot of those roles, like, the role of a teacher as a carer or the role of a school as a kind of community hub, I think that's really important. But I think schools should have enough money that they could employ enough people that those roles could be distributed a little differently. And I do think that children, and especially children who are autistic, I think they often suffer either because their teachers have not got enough specialized knowledge, which can, to an extent be blamed on training that's provided, but also on the lack of funding to allow that training to happen. But also, I think teachers are just sort of slightly overloaded themselves, and they're not set up in a system that allows them to come to school as their most empathetic, understanding selves. And I think if they were, probably that would go a long way towards supporting children who, for whatever reasons, might struggle to, whatever normal behavior is, who struggle to just come in, turn up, like be a student, learn some things and go home. There's almost no students who can do that. There's no teachers who can make that happen. But the whole system is set up to presume that that's what happens in a good classroom. Like a good teacher is a teacher who can turn a group of 30 people into people with no context who just they can turn up and for whatever reason they can soak whatever wisdom you decide to share with them. It's farcical, really.
I've always said I think, and again, you're more of the expert in this one, but I've always thought that the education system needs a little bit of a revamp in terms of, what we teach kids. And people will probably know where I'm going with this because I always say it in a speech or my talks is,
Mm,
a lot of individuals will go to school, learn how many wives Henry VIII had, but necessarily won't come out with those life skills that they need, in terms of reading a bank statement or reading or writing a resume, how to apply for a job,
mm,
all of these sort of life skills that people need. I mean, we're getting to the point as well where I saw a statistic the other day, I might be off on the percentage. There's a certain percentage of young individuals that now will not pick up the phone, even though
mm,
they have a phone and they use it for TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. If someone was to call them or they would need to make a phone call, um, they won't do it because they don't have the confidence to do that.
mm,
Um, so, I mean, it does lead to a question, which do you think teaching needs to evolve in the sense of we're teaching kids more of those things, or do you think that responsibility should be more with the parents and carers, or what are your sort of thoughts on that generally?
mm. Um, I think that academic learning is important, but it shouldn't be everything. And as things are at the moment, even in school systems where you might have like a technical route and you might have lots of like practical skill-based subjects, they are always seen in like a hierarchy where the academic is seen as better or like smarter or whatever. So I think one thing that would need to change is rebalancing that so that different forms of understanding and different forms of skill and knowledge are given an equal footing. I do think one of the big challenges is around social learning. So I do agree with you in what you're saying as well about things like speaking on the phone and other forms of confidence. Like, what I tend to see, so I'm primary, so I'm most of the time I work with older primary, so like 7 to 11 year olds. And what I notice is that because the curriculum is so stacked with academic stuff, there's not really any space left over for social learning. And it's seen as like to learn social skills is seen as it's like a remedy. So it's something that you would do as an intervention for a child who is presumed not to have any, rather than every single person needs social skill. We understand it lower down in the school. Like the main part of most sort of 4 and 5 year olds learning in a nursery or in early primary is social learning, and it's just seen as everyone needs this. This is the important stuff. This is at the heart of what it is to be you know a person. A person in a place where there are other people. You need the social skill. So for me, I think the role that I have now, whilst I sort of sneak back in by doing academic stuff because that's what schools are interested in and pay for. But like when I go in and teach things like Greek mythology, or if I'm teaching the Iliad or poetry retreats, I'm speaking an academic language that means, and it's not a trick. Like I do believe in those things, and I see that there's a lot of value in them. But actually, what I do, I suppose, is social learning is the heart of it, and it's hidden within academics. So like in the projects that I try to do, there's a lot of self-reflection, which I aim for, which we don't get to do in the school curriculum because it's quite fact heavy. As well as understanding each other, a lot of children and a lot of adults too, a lot of teachers are in the same boat. We've not given ourselves the time and we don't really understand how to take a step back from ourselves and think about how we are seeing the world and how we think about things, what our strengths are and what our values are, um, as well, like the social skills and the connection and things, by doing a lot of drama-based stuff. And I do a lot of repeated activities when I go in. So if I've got a 5 day project, I'll always start with a very similar set of routines at the beginning. And what I might find is that on day one, there might be four very confident, more extroverted kids who will happily join in. And then by day two, there might be a couple more. And then by day five, because I'm having that little routine that we've put in place, the kids are seeing that, you know, nothing bad comes from having a go at this. So I tried to make it that, unlike in the academic learning where you can be tested and you can be good at it or you can be bad at it, what I try to do and what I think there should be more of is opportunities where there is that wide range of routes to do things, wide ranges of expression, and there's not one correct way because most of the case it's not actually like that. And we present it to children like there's only one correct right answer to a lot of things and that there's only one correct way of doing things. In reality, there are many different ways. And I think that's certainly something that a lot of my like autistic students can attest to is that there are many different ways to know a thing. There are many different ways to achieve a thing. And that sometimes going their own route is, it might not seem like the quickest or simplest way for other people, but for them, there's a real logic to it. And I think opening up a space where people can express it and can learn and demonstrate what they're thinking in whichever ways feel most comfortable to them, it seems to be inclusive and supportive of children who have autism, but also of everybody. And I think a lot of what works well for neurodivergent children works well for everybody.
It's so true. And I remember when the National Autistic Society done the autism hour, which meant the shops opened a bit earlier and they made it more
Mm.
friendly. There were so many neurotypical people who actually preferred it. They went out in that hour as well and saw the benefit and was like, oh yeah, the music was lower and the lights were more dimmed and it was less busier. It was more, and you're right, there's a lot of socialization that if you adapted it towards neuro diverse individuals, you'd actually find that it would help a lot of neurotypical people as well. And I liked what you said about how you are teaching and how there isn't just one way of doing it, and it's picking up how those individuals learn, themselves. I mean, myself, I use my specialist subject, which is WWE knowledge, which is pointless
Mm.
in real life, hasn't served me well yet. But
Yeah.
what it does help me do is I will, if someone says to me, okay, when was Barack Obama elected president? What I am able to do is look at a wrestling event during that time and go, right, so, that would have been the year that these two fought. Okay, that year was 2008. That means Barack Obama was, and that's how my mind works. And it's
Mm.
fascinating uh,
Yeah.
how you can then use that specialist subject in order for you to, get to where you need to get the answer. So
Mm.
I find that really fascinating. Does lead me to my last question, which is, you know, as I've been interviewing people that have been on the series for, every year, say from series one to series five, let's just say series 10 happens and you're invited back on as one of the returning guests. What would you have hoped has changed not only for yourself, but also the school system and for neurodiversity as well?
Well, that's a good question. Um, so thinking about what I'm doing at the moment, so a lot of the work that I'm doing is around mythology and looking at how teaching mythology in settings in which it's not often taught feels different and looks different from the way that it has done in the past. So, there's a lot of elitism and prestige around things like Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey and things. And it's something I never got to learn as a kid myself. So my work largely at the minute is working in lots of East London primary schools, trying to make it something that is fully inclusive. So it's not just saying, right, give me like the five children in your class who are really, really good at reading or writing. I'll work with them. I want it to be something that works for all of them. Um, by doing that and like researching into it, I'm seeing that there's a really fascinating range of studies that are going on at the moment, looking at the relationships between classical mythology and autism, and like looking at why it seems to be the case. And it definitely chimes with what I've seen in my own, learning spaces as well, that a lot of like neurodivergent, say like 8, 9, 10, 11 year olds are really, really drawn to something in mythology. That there's a real pull about it. Maybe something about how the structure of the stories where there's a certainty to it and there's a predictability to it, but also there's a lot of different ways of seeing it and approaching it and thinking about it. Um, it just seems like there's some really fascinating stuff going on. So what I would hope is that in the next few years, I get to carry on deepening into that sort of work and, making any contribution that I make through teaching something that is really valuable and that opens doors for, autistic children rather than closing them and, empowering them to open those doors themselves as well, hopefully. I hope that sounds a little bit cheesy, doesn't it, Max? But I think,
More of that I think is needed, to be honest. So if we call it cheesy, then more cheesiness is needed in order to help and support people.
yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for your time as well, and thank you for coming on. It's really been insightful and really nice to get your insights as well. So, just thank you for your time, and yeah, let's hope in the next, 5 years we have you back on.
Oh, I hope so. Thanks, Max. I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
And guys, that does conclude this year's Autism Connections Series 6. I'm very sorry that we didn't get this out during Autism Acceptance Week, but I am a strong believer that, autism acceptance awareness shouldn't just be limited to 1 week or 1 month. We need to be doing more to understand neurodiversity, and I'm glad that it's actually worked out how it has. I'd like to thank all the guests, and it's hard to believe that it was all those years ago during the pandemic that the Autism Connections was created. And it's been so nice to catch up with the guests, from 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and see where their lives have taken them since the last time that we spoke. So, and also speaking to a new guest for Series 6 being Jonny. So I'd like to thank all the guests, and that would be Paul, that was Kim, that was Pete, that was then Barry, Mark, and the new guest for Series 6, Jonny. Thank you guys ever so much for watching. It really means a lot. Thank you and take care. Goodbye for now.